Car won't start? Before you call a mechanic, or worse, you call for that expensive tow truck, you're going to want to see this. There's a very good chance you can get it running on your own. I've been doing this for over 35 years, and I can't tell you how many cars get towed into the shop for something incredibly simple. And most drivers completely miss it. In fact, your car might be trying to tell you exactly what's wrong with it. You just don't know what to look for yet. In the next couple of minutes, I'm going to show you a few simple checks to help you figure out what's going on fast. Right, here's how we're going to break this down. When a car won't start, it's usually one of a few basic things, but the key is knowing how to quickly narrow it down. Instead of guessing, I'm going to walk you through a simple process I use in the garage every day. First, we're going to identify exactly what your car is doing or not doing. Let's start with the most important step. What is your car actually doing when you turn the key or press the start button? There are two common scenarios for a no start. The car cranks over but won't run, or the car doesn't crank over at all. We call this a no crank, no start condition. If you're experiencing a no start condition with your car, chances are you're experiencing it from this exact position. There's a couple of things you can check quickly while you're right here in the driver's seat. The first thing is, does your key even turn? If your key is not turning at all, there might be a simple fix for it. You see this one here? I can't get this key to move at all. A lot of times we see this happen. You pull into a parking spot quickly, you turn in and you just shut the car off and jump out. But what the car has is a steering lock in it. So this steering lock is keeping the wheel from turning. But if you've parked with the steering lock in a position where it's got tension on it, you won't be able to turn the key, like this one right here. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to actually take some tension off the steering lock. So you can see how this is springing back and forth. So you might want to just pull your steering wheel a little bit and then see if the key turns. You see how easily that happens? Okay, now my steering wheel lock is not stopping me or preventing me from turning the ignition key. A couple of other things you can check quickly from the interior are what your dash lights are doing. So now I've got my steering unlocked. I turn my key on and everything lights up on the dash. If your dashboard doesn't illuminate like this, chances are you've got a bad or a weak battery. The next step, you might want to turn the car to the crank position and see what happens. Now this car is starting fine because it's working fine. But if your vehicle doesn't crank over, now we've gone to one of those two directions. Now we've got a no crank, no start condition. The engine needs that starter motor in order to turn over. If you've identified that you can't get the vehicle to crank over at all, the starter motor is not engaging, there are a couple of things you can do inside the car here that are fairly simple. One of them is to check your shifter and make sure that it's engaged in park. And you maybe even want to step on the brake, put the vehicle into neutral, and try again to start from the neutral position. Okay, so there's some items inside the car, neutral safety switch or a gear selector position switch that may be failing. If you put it into neutral, sometimes that circuit will allow the car to start. The car should start in park or neutral, but not any of the other gears, forward or reverse. Sometimes turning the key on and moving it from park into neutral and then starting the car is enough to allow it to run. Now, if you can't move your shifter at all from park into neutral, there's a possibility you have a bad brake light switch. The brake light switch is needed to start the vehicle. There's a simple check for that. You can just step on the brakes and have somebody look at your brake lights in the back and see if the brake lights are operational. If you don't see any brake lights in the back, it's possible your brake light switch is part of the problem. Now, there are a couple of cars out there with push button that have some override features. I think one of them is Toyota, allows you to hold that start button down for an extended period of time without stepping on the brake, and the vehicle will eventually start. You might want to look in your owner's manual and see if there's some sort of an override feature. If you don't have brake lights and you want to get your vehicle started, there might be some override for stepping on the brake pedal. Another simple test we can do here from the driver's seat is to turn the headlights on and then try to start the vehicle. So right now I can see the headlights in front of me. When I go to crank this vehicle, those headlights should stay bright and they should stay lit. Okay, if your headlights go dim or they turn off completely or the lights start to flicker, you've got a couple of scenarios here that could be wrong. You could have a bad connection to the battery, or you could just have a weak battery. Another common scenario we see when we go to crank the car over is the car makes some noise but doesn't crank over. So you might hear a clicking sound. You might hear a rapid clicking sound that sounds like a machine gun. Those are usually indications that you may have a dead battery, but you want to check that in conjunction with these headlights being on. Okay, if you're hearing that click sound and your headlights are extremely bright and they look normal, You may have some other problem there, like a starter motor or still a bad connection somewhere at the starter. So this is an easy test to determine if your battery is weak. This is what we're looking for. We're looking for those headlights to go dim. We're looking for them, maybe they don't come on at all. We're looking for them to cut out when we crank. Maybe they go dim when we crank. So those are examples where you might just have a bad battery in there. You can also look at those dash lights again, and if those dash lights are flickering or anything while you're trying to crank it over, you probably have a weak battery as well, or a bad connection. All right, so we've got another example here of something that might cause you to have a no crank, no start condition, and that might be a faulty key fob. So your key fob, whether you've got a key like this with a fob attached to it, or just a fob with no key and a press start, a push button start, it's possible the key fob battery is bad. Okay, so if you have a bad battery, a lot of times when you turn the ignition on, you'll see that warning on the dashboard. Make sure you look for that. If you've got a bad key fob battery, the car may not start. Now, there are some examples where if you have a bad key fob battery, maybe it's not dead, but it's weak, you might still be able to get the vehicle started. So we see this with several vehicles out there. They may have an extra slot somewhere to put the key fob into. You insert it, which allows that transmitter to be in direct contact with a receiver inside of there, which kind of eliminates the need for the strong battery temporarily. So if you have a car like that with a key fob only, a press button start, and you have a slot somewhere to insert your key fob, you might want to try that as well. That might help restore the communication between the key fob and the computer in the car. Now, not every car has got a slot. We see other examples of cars that just have a location, maybe inside the center console or something, where you have to rest your key up against it. Okay, so there are certain vehicles that do that. This is another example where if you think your key fob is not communicating with the car, you want to look in the owner's manual and see if there's any override or auxiliary pattern that you can perform in order to get that key fob to communicate. There is one more scenario that you might find on certain cars. We see this a lot on Nissan style products where they have a steering lock mechanism that's electronic. If you notice that your vehicle is off and your key is out of the car, but your steering wheel never locks, this might be a reason why you won't be able to get your vehicle started. It's common for those to fail. It's not an easy diagnosis, but if you find the key is not even in the car and your steering lock doesn't work at all, it could be the culprit. So continuing along the lines of the vehicle won't crank over and it won't start, there's a couple of more things we can check under the hood. So we've already determined that if we've got our headlights dimming, or we've got that rapid clicking sound, or maybe a solid clicking sound, we may have a problem with the battery or a battery connection. Well, the simple thing to do is to come out here to your battery and inspect it. We want to look at these terminals for a couple of things. We want to note if there's a bunch of corrosion around the top of the battery terminals that may be preventing a solid connection. Okay, a simple thing you can do as well is to grab these terminals and give them a wiggle. Okay, these terminals should be very tight. I shouldn't be able to pull them back and forth. So if you can grab your terminals and wiggle them, you probably have a bad connection. That needs to be tightened up and restored. If you've determined that your battery cables are tight and clean and everything is good here, there is one more check you can do on your battery. Some of these batteries have a little window on there to let you know the state of charge on it. So you can look in that window. If you see the green eye in there, it usually means your battery is good. Okay, but that's not necessarily a great indication. The next step for this process would be to test the battery on it. So we've determined already we've got the headlights are dimming, maybe we've got that rapid clicking sound, we've checked our connections, everything is clean and tight. The next step would probably be to test the battery. Now, if you don't have a way to test the battery, this might be a time where you're going to pull that out and take it to your local parts store, have them test it for you. If it's bad, you bring it back and install it. Just important to note, there are a lot of reasons a battery could go bad. If your battery is fairly new, you may have some sort of a charging system problem or some other issue that's causing your battery to go bad. Maybe something's draining overnight. These are things that you'll need to have checked if the problem continues over several days. Another scenario we see here is a defective starter motor. So if you've got a solid click every time you go to start it, you hear something clicking but nothing else is happening, it's possible your starter motor is bad. It may not be something you can easily diagnose, but there are a couple of simple tips you can do. If you can access your starter motor, sometimes a simple tap with a hammer will allow that starter motor to re-engage temporarily, at least, to get your car started. So it's worth giving it a try. So we've kind of wrapped up all the things that you can easily check for in a no crank, no start condition. The car is not cranking over. But you might be in a scenario where the engine actually cranks, is trying to start, but it won't run at all. So there are a few things you can check here as well. And the most common thing that we see with a cranks and no start is just going to be a vehicle's out of fuel. So I think one of the things you want to check is make sure your gas tank is full. If you haven't put gas in recently, it's a simple check to say, hey, you know what, maybe I'm out of gas. Or maybe you haven't put gas in recently, the tank is still reading 3/4. Perhaps your gauge went bad and you've actually run out of fuel. Maybe you've been driving all week and you didn't even notice that your gauge isn't moving. So make sure you got fuel in the vehicle. That's an important step there to make sure the car is going to run after it's cranking. Another example we see quite often is if you turn the key on and you try to start it, the car will crank over, but it won't run. But you might see something wrong with the vehicle anti-theft system in the car. We see this a lot on Nissan and Infiniti products where the VAT system is illuminated. You might have a little padlock on the dash, a little indication of a key or something, some security light that's flashing. If you see a flashing light or one of these security lights that's on steady, it could be the computer is disabling the car because it hasn't picked up that the key is actually being used with the car. This is a good example where you can say, okay, I see the security light on, let's try a different key fob. Maybe go in the house and get the other key fob and put this one away and see if that key fob starts. A lot of times you'll get that car to run with a different key fob. It may have lost communication somewhere. So keep in mind your vehicle anti-theft system could be stopping you from starting your vehicle if it's cranking over and won't run. From here on out, a car that cranks over but won't run gets a little bit more complicated to self-diagnose. It is possible if you've done some work recently, you did something under the hood, maybe you touched something, that maybe you left something disconnected. It's always worth a visual inspection under the hood to make sure that everything looks in place, looks like it's connected. Check your ground connections. You know, anything that has a little bolt that bolts to the body or something, you want to make sure those are all intact and tight. We've already talked about battery terminals and things, so I'm not talking about there. I'm talking about something remote from the battery, something on a fender, maybe something on an engine, somewhere along those lines. If you want to pull the cover off the engine, make sure everything looks like it's plugged in and intact. It's also possible there's a blown fuse somewhere. If you have a way to check your fuses, it might be worth going through the list of fuses, either under the hood in the under hood fuse box or under the dash. There might be 1 or 2 locations there. And check your fuses and see if anything's blown. That would be a simple check you could do if you had a way to test the fuses. So I hope I've given you some food for thought here. If you're struggling with a vehicle that won't start, I've given you lots of great tips, some things that you might be able to do to actually get your car started without calling a tow truck, without going to the mechanic to have them look at it, and without having to have a bunch of downtime. So a couple of things we should mention here before I let you run. There are some things that you can do to test some of these products on your own. Other than just using some headlights to test a battery, there are simple tools like this one that work with a smartphone like this. It'll allow you to test your own battery, test your own charging system without having to go to a parts store or anything. You can do that right at home. These devices are fairly inexpensive. I think this one's running about $50 on Amazon. And you should have one of these tools as well. If you're driving around and you got a dead battery, this is a great tool, this Noco Boost, to keep in your toolbox in the trunk, or maybe just put it under the seat, and you have this prepared for you in an emergency that you can jumpstart your own car without anybody else there to help you. I've done videos on both of these products. Go ahead and check those out if there's something you're interested in. But preparation is always the key for success. Instead of waiting for something to happen, be a little proactive, get yourself a couple products, test your battery regularly, and have something in the event of an emergency, your battery does go bad, that you can remedy the situation without having to call somebody. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something. I hope maybe if you're stranded right now, this video has saved you a little bit of grief. And we appreciate you following along. Make sure you check out some more of our great content, and we'll see you in the next video.